Let's jump in and get started with today's content. So you might want to move off Salesforce. Before we even introduce ourselves, before we tell you about who we are, context, right, is king. Super important. And we just want to level set and go over one more time our goal today. If you are contemplating making a move off Salesforce, it is our goal, it's Brendan's and my goal as your host, that you will walk away from today's session with two things: confidence and certainty that there are other great options available to you, right? We just want to share what those options are and make sure that you feel confident in them. Before we go any further, stock ticker CRM, right? Salesforce, emphasis on force. Salesforce is absolutely a successful business, right? They've built something incredible, almost $300 billion valuation, 150,000 customers. It's a force. It's a force of a company. And by nature of the fact that we're having this conversation today. So disclaimer, Salesforce isn't bad. And this session is not a Salesforce slam fest. We are not here, Brendan and I are not here to tell you whether you've made a good choice, a poor choice, a bad choice. The reality is some people love Salesforce, right? Their implementation is rock solid. Their teams are happy. They're getting value. They're seeing results. And honestly, that's what we want. That's what we're in business to do. We built our careers around people getting results and values from tools like this. So Salesforce can be a great platform. And are there areas where Salesforce can excel over others? 100%. But what we are here to talk about today, right? I'm a big believer variety is the spice of life. Having good options, having variety available to us, this is what we all want. So we can make the best decisions for ourselves, for our teams, for our businesses. And if you're not loving it, you've got options, right? At one point, Salesforce might have been the best, the only option available to you. And today that is a myth. It is not the only best-in-class platform, and it's not the only leading platform in the market. So the beauty of this conversation is that Salesforce isn't bad, but variety is the spice of life. And if you're not loving it, you've got options. So it's good to see you. Thank you all so much for joining. I love people are jumping in. Brendan, thanks for letting them in as I'm talking. I'm a terrible multitasker, so it's a good thing we got teamwork going here. Is Brendan and I kind of put our heads together on a couple of assumptions of why you're here. And for all of those that registered for the event but couldn't make it live and wanted to have the link, thank you also for joining us in the future. So when we were thinking about the presentation, we kind of put our minds together of who would be interested in this conversation and who would be looking for these options. So the first is, you're in budgeting season, you're doing due diligence, you're looking at your whole tech stack, right? And you're just evaluating what's available to you, what's the reality of the situation you're in. You're actively contemplating making a move to Salesforce. And you're just curious about what we have to say as you're in your evaluation process. You're already migrating off Salesforce. You've already made the choice. You're maybe just looking for a little more validation or another perspective as you're already making that transition. You're a Salesforce super fan. You saw this title. You thought Brendan and I were crazy. And you're like, I just got to see what these people have to say. That might be true. So I hope that I disarmed you at the top with saying that Salesforce isn't bad and this isn't a slam fest. Or you're on Salesforce and you're not happy. And you haven't really started moving in any direction. But if you're not happy with where you are, the reality is you have to do something about it, right? If you want something to change. So finally, kind of level setting, love that proverbial idea of write what you know. So why did we pick this topic? Why are we here to talk about this today? As I said, Salesforce is absolutely the incumbent. They owned over 20% of the CRM market share. We'll call it the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And so leaning on that conventional wisdom of writing what you know, Brendan and I have personal experience with this topic of Salesforce, moving from Salesforce to another platform, something we have personal experience with. I do want to say, though, we're biased. If you happen to look us up on LinkedIn before today's session, if you looked up our company, you know we're associated with Microsoft. And while we're biased, this isn't a commercial. I actually challenged us to not say the M word as for as long as we could and as few times as possible, because what we want to do is show you that you have your other options available to you. But this is a conversation. This is definitely a dialogue that we love to engage in with prospects and customers. And the truth is it's not about the technology. It's always what you do with it. So who are we? I guess a little more formal introductions. My name is Ariel Upton. I am the head of growth here at Route 16, and I've known Brendan for over a decade, which is wild and also delightful. We worked together twice at two different companies. So the first company was a implementation partner, a technology consulting firm called Sonoma Partners, where we were both a Dynamics and Salesforce shop. We sold both, we competed against both, we implemented both, we helped customers get that success that they were looking for with both. We even did the wild and crazy thing of using both at the same time for our own internal CRM. Do not recommend that, but we did it. And today we work together at a firm called Route 16, where we're 100% focused on Microsoft. My role, I lead marketing and sales strategy, and I always joke that I care more about CRM than anyone should, but as a marketing and sales leader, I actually care about it the exact right amount, which is a lot, because you cannot be effective in marketing, in sales, without process, without data, without understanding who your customers are and what your sales and marketing teams are doing to engage, reach, and help those customers see success. So my personal experience, I've used two lone implementations of Salesforce. I've used both at the same time. Today, we just use Dynamics. I even went on a wild journey of taking a company from Pipedrive to HubSpot to Salesforce in less than 18 months. Like, don't really recommend that either if you ever want to talk about it. But I've played in this space a long time. I care about it a lot, and I know what it can do for growth teams, for revenue teams. And so if you're like, wow, she's really excited about this, it is because I am. So with that, I'll kick it over to Brendan.
Good afternoon or good morning, everybody, depending on where you are. I'm Brendan Landers. I'm one of the principals and co-founders at Route 16, the firm Ariel just described. I've been in the space since 2006, so very long in the tooth. Grew up as an implementer, leading large projects and project teams. And while the bulk of my time has been with one platform, Microsoft, I have deep experience with both Microsoft and Salesforce, and I've led implementations from both platforms. I helped lead our team at Sonoma Partners, our Salesforce team, and again at Ernst & Young. We got acquired by Ernst & Young. Bill didn't join me over there, but when I was at EY for 2 years, and there I also led EY Salesforce practice. So I was 100% focused on Salesforce in those 2 years. And in the last 4 years, since we started Route 16, I've been involved in numerous migrations from Salesforce and literally dozens of conversations with companies exploring the change. Today, I'm excited to share my experience, what I hear, what I've seen, and what I know on the topic. I'm confident we'll miss something, right? There's some other reason that people make the switch that we haven't included here, but this is rooted in experience. This isn't ChatGPT's version of why people leave. This is our blood, sweat, and tears. So that's my introduction. Excited to share more. All right. So I'm going to take this one as well. Why Salesforce? And this is more about why do people choose Salesforce. So we thought it made sense to ground the conversation and why people make the decision to begin with, both 10 years ago, today, et cetera, from our experiences. And honestly, the first one, Ariel already touched, market leader, no doubt about it. No one gets fired for implementing Salesforce is a line we've heard before. It's been number one in the market for many, many moons. It will continue to be number one for some period of time. They own a large chunk of the market. So obviously, market leader, no brainer. Secondly, it's a comprehensive platform, right? Give it credit where credit's due. A broad range of integrated tools for sales and service, marketing, commerce, data management, reporting, and more recently, the AI story is getting better over there. The third reason is it's highly customizable and configurable. So you can do what you need with Salesforce. You typically can get accomplished what you need to get accomplished with the platform. It may take customization, but you generally can do what you need to with the platform. The fourth reason is the app exchange. So Salesforce has the largest third-party marketplace of any CRM vendor out there, and literally thousands of apps in the App Exchange, integrations with products, et cetera. Others are catching up, but Salesforce has a very rich App Exchange, and they push it, frankly. If Salesforce can't do something, there's likely an app for that. The fifth reason would be scalability. It's a scalable platform. Companies of all sizes are using Salesforce. So I'd be lying if I told you it wasn't a scalable platform. Six, there's industry-specific solutions. So there are some industry-specific solutions in industries like financial services and healthcare and retail. And lastly, and this is the big one, it's the hardest one for me to wrap my head around, honestly, and it's the emotional connection. Frankly, there's a lot of sales teams that just have familiarity, comfortability, confidence with Salesforce, and they kind of have a perspective. For whatever reason, it gets it's moved, shifted a little bit, but it gets sort of the reputation of being the cool product compared to some of the bigger, more traditional vendors like Oracle's and SAP's of the world, and Microsoft to a certain extent. So the emotional connection that's real, and we'd be remiss if we ignore that. That said, there's a couple. So those are the 7 reasons we think people make the decision. That said, there's a couple of these that I don't personally, my experience tells me aren't that great, and I'm going to focus on 2 of them. So one is the App Exchange. As someone who moves people away from Salesforce, often one of the things we see is a mess of apps in their current environment, and what that translates to is a tremendous amount of tech debt. They made it really easy to install apps in their environment, not unlike these phones we all carry around, right? I have hundreds of apps in my phone. I bet 80% of them I don't even know why I put on my phone or what I used it for and don't need. And I feel similar with Salesforce. And so, I'd say don't treat your CRM like your phone, because it creates tech debt, it creates challenges, it creates obstacles and performance issues, et cetera. And then the second area that I personally don't endorse is the industry-specific solutions. It's great to have thought leadership on industry from our perspective. And there are some industries that have very deep solutions that maybe make sense, but our experience tells us that most industry-specific solutions contain 30% of what a customer needs and 70% of what they don't. And therefore, they're installing and creating sort of additional tech debt, as I mentioned earlier, with these industry-specific solutions. Our perspective typically is use the industry-specific solutions as inspiration, and implement kind of what you need, the components you need, and therefore you have full control over your environment. You're not tied to some other upgrade or tied to what if they no longer support this industry-specific solution, and now you have to go rebuild and almost start over. So from our perspective, App Exchange, industry-specific solutions, I'd want you to think twice about how great those things really are. Next, Ariel's going to take you through why we see people consider leaving Salesforce, making the change, making the move.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. So, kind of level setting of how we got here and now why move. So I did use ChatGPT once just to validate against Brendan and my ideas and our sauce about this. So since the topic today is contemplating a move off, I asked ChatGPT kind of like the primary reasons that people choose to move off of Salesforce. And to be honest, it did a pretty decent job summarizing some of these high-level issues people have. I would argue that this would probably be a very similar list to almost any technology that you input. And you might be experiencing 1 or 2 of these bullets, or maybe you have at a previous company, but it wasn't enough to actually warrant a full move. But when Brendan and I were building the presentation today, this whole conversation is that there's actually 3 primary buckets that when we see our customers who have actually moved off, or we find ourselves in conversations with people who are considering it, if they're in one of these buckets and they're squarely in them, the momentum to move is it's on their side. So the first is fatigue. We're going to go into more detail of each of these, but I kind of want to just paint it at the high level. Fatigue is a feeling, right? And how the Salesforce fatigue shows up for people, it shows up in how you're being sold to. It shows up in how you're being managed day to day or year to year. It shows up in recurring issues around what was bought versus what you have. It shows up in a lot of ways. The second is this idea of a house of cards. So Brendan's going to cover this in more detail, but there comes a moment where if you're in a current implementation, walls feel shaky, ground's just kind of going under your feet, roof feels like it could cave in at any moment. It's like this house of cards, and you're at this crossroads of you are going to have to rebuild this. And if you are going to have to rebuild it in Salesforce, you're just doing good business evaluating what those other options are. And finally, the third bucket is cost. So I laughed when, ChatGPT, when it unfolded its answer for me, because it got the prioritization spot on for this one, that the first two bullets were high subscription costs and hidden costs. So there's an overlap here with fatigue, which we'll talk about, but there are times where you may find that you're in a position, you are staring at such a big annual savings number in terms of licensing that you can't look away. And to be fair, it would almost be negligent to do so for the business to not actually evaluate, is there another option available to me if this is the reality of what these costs are? So let's dive into these in a little more detail. So the first one is Salesforce fatigue. This isn't new. We've been hearing about this for years. It's probably near the point that it's almost downright exhaustion at this point, but Salesforce fatigue is real. We've seen it with our own eyes. Kind of have some quotes here that you can read from yourself that we have that we reflect on from our customers, from our prospects, from real conversations we have. I love to do a little armchair expert diagnosis in most situations. So I've built this kind of Salesforce fatigue checklist. So I'll read these kind of symptoms to you. And so just think about if you've ever felt these in your experience, your day-to-day working with Salesforce, whether that's in your current role or a previous one. So kind of that first one is you felt pressure to buy something you didn't want, your team didn't want, or you didn't need. The second is you felt discomfort when the reality of what was delivered or what you actually bought looked different than what either you were marketed to, what you were promised, maybe what you were sold. The third, and like I said, I'll go more into detail on this one, but you felt either that slow or sudden creep of costs and importantly, not with a proportionate amount of related value. And then the final one is you felt a general feeling of people maybe going around you, as if you're the decision maker, you're the one in charge, you're the one making the decisions, but maybe you don't want to have that add-on, or you don't want to buy that thing, that you might feel at times that people are going around you. So if any of these statements at all feel familiar or like a flavor of something that you felt in your experience, my friend, you've encountered Salesforce fatigue firsthand. And we're not saying, definitely other platforms, other tools, they have their own flavor of fatigue. There is nothing that exists without its own, but these are the pretty specific and unique examples of what we hear from people moving off of Salesforce, or those people who are unhappy with Salesforce that are exploring that potential move off.
All right, so House of Cards. It's funny, I was on the phone. This isn't a made-up story, by the way, for the webinar. This actually happened, but I was on the phone with a prospect this morning where prospect mentioned on the phone, we were talking about kind of making a slow move, dipping our toe in this journey that we're talking about with you folks today. But his quote was, our Salesforce instance is over-engineered. We're using it in ways it shouldn't be used and suffering the consequences of doing so. And these are conversations we have all the time. Again, not necessarily platform agnostic, or not necessarily one platform. They are issues that are platform agnostic, but they're real. And the reality is there's a lot of Salesforce out there. So we hear these probably more on that side because there's a lot of Salesforce out there, right? The other bullets here on the slide kind of illustrate the same point. The thing that I want to share here is, first of all, this isn't specific to Salesforce. A application or CRM environment that's kind of a house of cards, those exist everywhere. It's a CRM challenge across the board, right? But the reality is, CRM systems require care and feeding. And quite often people just don't take that serious until it's too late. And when we say care and feeding, we mean not just creating new features or adding stuff, but actually cleaning up stuff as well. And by cleaning up stuff, not just data, actually cleaning up, retiring things no longer used, the tech that I mentioned earlier on. And candidly, customers almost never do this right. And it creates usability issues, performance issues, and ultimately adoption issues. Things like, why do I see these tables I don't use? Why does that field still on the form? We haven't used that in years. There's just too much to sift through, right? So I'm not going to use it. And sometimes that house of cards become untenable. So you need to change something. And so what are your options, right? Your options are, from my perspective, you relaunch, you rebuild, or you reconsider. And by reconsider, I mean replatform. So let's walk through this. So relaunch, what we mean there is kind of move some stuff around, fresh coat of paint, maybe clean some stuff up. Our experience is when done well, this can extend the life of your CRM system for a period of time. But the reality is the relaunch, kind of moving some stuff around, fresh coat of paint, tends to be temporary. Makes a dent but doesn't move the needle, if you will. Certainly an option, and depending on where you're at in your journey, it may be an option that makes sense. Second option is rebuild, and so that's, hey, let's just forget about this current environment. We're going to stand up a new one. We'll take what we learned and make it better this time. We're going to do it right this time, right? We always do it right the second time, not the first, that sort of thing. Sometimes this works, but sometimes what's rebuilt is a new house of cards. And honestly, my advice there would be same people, same process, same outcome. If you're using the same people to build a new system, you are likely going to get their version of the system. And you maybe over-rotate in certain areas and change things dramatically in other areas, kind of keep the same functionality. But ultimately, same people, same process, same outcome. Third option is reconsider, replatform, looking at alternatives. As we stated earlier, generally the technology isn't a problem. Usually it's some other factor, but sometimes a new platform is needed just to get users over the adoption hump and buy-in. It has to look different, has to feel different, has to smell different, has to be called something different, simple stuff like that. Even new users knowing a new company was brought in to help fix or change or rebuild or replatform, that goes a long way. With people saying, all right, maybe I'll give it another look. The company's really taking a shot at it. It's not the same guy, moving some stuff around. But all of this said, all of these require change management. Regardless of the path you go down, a key component is change management. The mental game is super strong on this one. I always tell people I didn't go to school for IT to become a psychologist, but the reality of what we do is change management is a ton of psychology, and every day we're dealing with them in these projects, and it's fun, frankly. So there isn't necessarily a right answer here, right? As I mentioned earlier, relaunch tends to fail more often because users figure out quickly it's just a fresh coat of paint, and over time that wears a bit. But all of these are valid options. We'll go into a little bit more of how do we go down that path here in a couple slides forward. So that said, moving on, Ariel.
Moving on. Okay, so I was a little quick to click there. So the third reason, right, and this is costs. So we touched on this in fatigue, but cost is a major issue. Anytime we're evaluating a new tool that we're bringing into our business, anytime we're looking at our tech stack, cost plays into every platform selection conversation we have. This is not unique to CRM. And while it might not be the number one source of fatigue you're feeling, you might be feeling something else. Costs are always top consideration. So a couple of reasons why we hear costs feel like they're out of control for customers on Salesforce is, let's start first, high per user pricing model. Salesforce is widely known as being the most expensive tool compared to other platforms. This translates to almost 30 to 50% more. Widely known, right? That's just put it out there that just the cost, the cost of entrance is so high. And then you feel that more with expiring initial discounts. And this is common sales strategy. Many providers use this. Many tools use this. This was like infamous when I was using HubSpot all of the time. It was so inexpensive, and then it got so disproportionately expensive over time. Is that once those expiring discounts transpire, then all of a sudden you have that high user license model and these high costs, and you can just feel it, that impact, it just creeps on you. Kind of going off of what Brendan was saying about App Exchange, these expensive over-reliance on add-ons, the more single point solutions you need, the more single point solutions you need across the business. Each of those come with incremental costs, not only in terms of licensing, but migration costs and integration costs and maintenance costs. Salesforce administrators, let's also talk kind of about that. There's this whole economy that's been created around the niche skill set of Salesforce administrators, and they are paramount to successful implementations. They're expensive resources, they are niche resources, and they're finite resources. So that's another way that kind of the total cost of ownership of Salesforce can feel high and feel expensive. You will pay handsomely for that position. And so because of all of these things together, right, this is where that total number, just like you look at it, and going back to what I said at the beginning, if the team is happy, if process is being followed, if you're seeing those results, cost might be worth it. Cost of entry is worth it. But if you're not, it's just a very large number that kind of grows, balloons, and you know that there are other options out there. And that's where kind of this really becomes that moment when people start to evaluate something else, when that disproportionate amount of value really shows up. So we're going to pause for a second here. So we kind of just like recap of where we've been and what we envision for the rest of our time together. So kind of level set and our table stakes of what the goal is of the conversation today. Brendan really walked us through why people choose Salesforce to begin with. How did we get here? How did they become that leader, kind of that incumbent? We covered those three main reasons, those kind of buckets, or I call them like moments of momentum that people, when they find themselves in them, they're going to move off. So well, the end of our talk track, which we're going to get through kind of in like the next 15, 20 minutes, is what are those other options? So this is, like we said, we're biased. We don't want this to be a commercial, but we really want to talk through what your other options are, that you can make those decisions for yourself of what the next conversations would be for you to have. And then we're going to have time at the end for a couple of questions, Q&A. So if you have questions, we also brought our head of development, Corey O'Brien, on the call. He'll join us later. So if you have more of a technical question, but kind of just want a level set of where we've been and now where we're going. So we're going to move just into like what those other options are. All right, take it away, Brendan.
All right. So, as Ariel said a few times already, right? Salesforce isn't the only game in town. And in a couple slides here, we'll share some Gartner info. So hopefully unbiased Gartner info. Gartner is probably slightly biased as well, but we'll share some info there. But here we've listed a few. HubSpot kind of come out of nowhere in the CRM game. I mean, we knew they were coming, but they've in the last few years made a big dent, right? There's bigger players at Oracle that have kind of reinvented themselves a little bit, and then some smaller niche players, finding themselves in the market as well, like Zoho. And there's a variety of others, which we'll talk about shortly. But beside the reason we talked about, people leaving Salesforce, there are some components to a platform that we feel are incredibly important. And we don't hear about a ton yet, but it's kind of increasing every day. And we should be hearing about them, frankly. And they're components that simply haven't been addressed well. On the Salesforce side, things such as low code and RPA, from our perspective, having one set of tools across sales, service, marketing, but also working seamlessly with AI and other core capabilities like low code and RPA platforms have huge benefits beyond the simple sort of one throat to choke, right? Think about connectors and just applications talking to each other. A true platform has these components, or has these components either very near, adjacent, or baked in. So that's things that these are things that we think you should be thinking about. And honestly, that these are modern tools that every organization is using to some extent, but will grow exponentially over the next 3 to 5 years. Gartner estimates that market demand for citizen developer apps will grow 5x faster than IT departments can support, traditional IT departments, right? And their perspective is 70% of new applications as a result of that shipped by large enterprises will use low-code, no-code development platforms. Companies are figuring out their citizen developer plan and process. They're creating that model. The governance is getting figured out. All of these objectives from the last couple of years are getting worked through. But the reality is developer workloads are growing. Think about all the data being created these days and all the new tech out there. Developer workloads are growing. Citizen makers, so non-developers, right? Frankly, increase speed to market, and low-code dev is more cost efficient for the right use cases. And I want to emphasize that point, for the right use cases. We don't suggest that all of your application needs will be fulfilled by low code, but for the right use cases, they make low code, no code make a ton of sense. So if you're not contemplating these things, we think you should be, and we think you should be including that in your overall evaluation of the CRM tools, frankly. So here on this slide, Ariel was showing some of the low-code players out there. Some of these names you probably never heard of, but worth checking out, worth understanding capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So the next two slides, we're going to talk just about both Gartner's Salesforce automation, which they define as basically, I'll just say for the sake of the conversation, CRM for sales users, right? And then we'll talk about their customer engagement, which is the customer service side of the world. So we took 2020, and I don't have access to 2024 yet. I'm hoping to get it shortly. But just comparing Gartner's information from 2020 versus 2023, right? 2020 is when we started the business. The reality is some players have just appeared, right? HubSpot, I mentioned a minute ago, Business Next, they weren't even on the map, right? Some players have regressed. SAP, Zendesk, and even Salesforce to a small extent. And some have increased, right? Some have gotten better, like Zoho, and Microsoft's moved over a little bit in certain cases. So, and on the next slide, you're going to see something similar. So in the customer service space, you'll see the same idea here, right? In 2020, Salesforce, frankly, was in a land by its own on the customer engagement, customer service side. I mean, look at everybody that was in the leader quadrant other than them was barely in the leader quadrant, right? Fast forward to 23, similar things have occurred, right? Some have retreated. ServiceNow, Zendesk. When we think about customer service, those are two that pop in the mind very quickly. They're retreating. SAP and Oracle are retreating. Why? For our perspective, some of these are just legacy apps, right? SAP, Oracle haven't kept up with the times, so we're not surprised that they're repeating from a customer service perspective, that is. And others, it's platform, right? There was a time where people wanted to buy purpose-built apps. I just want a service app and over here, and then I want my sales app somewhere else, a different app. The reality is people are looking for platforms now, and that's why we think ServiceNow and Zendesk have retreated in this particular space. The next slide we have, this is the one slide that I think is kind of a commercial. And we didn't put this together. In fairness, we found this, came across this on LinkedIn. We validated with the person who shared it on LinkedIn that this is new 24 data. And it is highlighting Microsoft's evolution over the last few years. So that's the commercial, that's the highlight. So sorry, couldn't edit that out. But the reality is, and it kind of highlights the talk track I just had, right? Your platform is bigger than sales, service, marketing. Think about things like ERP. Maybe you have a different system for that. That's not all that uncommon. But think about RPA and low code. And I would encourage you, look where Salesforce lives on those platforms. They have some functionality, but they're lagging. They're behind. And when you think about this whole piece, this whole puzzle, right? Those are important components that are being overlooked that shouldn't, frankly. All right. So now what, right? So we talked a little bit about some of the other players, and with the intent of getting kind of the wheels spinning. But the question we find ourselves with now is, okay, if I were in your shoes, what would I do? If this is something that's you're thinking about, I'm assuming you've joined this webinar because you're having these thoughts, or someone is, or you've been asked to explore, right? How do we get started? Where do we go from here? So I'll share our very high level perspective on how we get started. So, if you're serious about making the switch, first, we recommend get a handle on the current state. What are we using in the platform today? What do we need? Where is the value? Oftentimes we just lift and shift things that aren't even being used or needed. So we encourage you, really hone in on what is the functionality you need? Where is 80-90% of the time being spent? Those are your requirements. Those are your very specific requirements you should be looking at. Second, determine what is the priority. What's most important, right? And compare that against other platforms. Figuring out what comes out on top in terms of meeting your requirements. So the artifact we're showing here is an example of vendor assessment template that we've used, and some of the information is obfuscated. Because it's customer specific and things specific. But the idea here is we have a matrix we use in these examples. Try to take an agnostic approach, right? We score basically requirements based on company client inputs and priorities. So, not all, let's just say, opportunity management is a requirement, right? Not all customers are going to have the same score there. It depends on your weighting, how important it is to your business, those types of things, right? So we put in weighting to the requirements, and then we look at external analysis, reference that information. Ultimately, we come up with like, who's the highest scored in terms of fit for our requirements, and oftentimes they're close. So then we move on to total cost of ownership. So beyond just, okay, good, we know which platforms meet our requirements or how close they map to our requirements. What is the cost? And that's not just license cost. That's just not just the per user per month, but also implementation costs, right? What is it going to cost? What's the cost to move? And what's the cost of resources? So, to support this, both from an implementation standpoint and beyond. So how many FTEs will we need to support this? How many external resources will we need? Will we need to continue to use a external vendor? Those types of things. So we typically look at this over a 5-year time frame. We put in these costs, license, implementation, support costs, FTE, salary costs, the whole nine. And this is how we come up with our answers, right? And look at what is the best fit for each organization. Hopefully that makes sense. We're happy to. The reality is that spreadsheet's a little complicated. So if anyone wants to dig deeper, we'd be happy to have that conversation when the time is right. But now I want to talk a little bit about the realities of migration, right? Historically, and even today to an extent, migrations are daunting, right? Am I starting over? Will the new system will it be able to do what I need it to? How long is it going to take? And those are valid questions today, but the answers were much worse 3 to 5 years ago. Frankly, this has gotten a lot easier. So the reality is things are different now. Feature parity is real. Product gaps are small. In some cases, there are none. Tried and true processes exist to make these shifts. And also tooling exists to move both metadata and data. We'll talk a little bit about that down the road here. But that said, it's still a little large project, right? Still requires attention. But for most, it's far less heavy than the last time you considered it, took a look at this. I'll share a couple of examples real quick. So we built some IP that helps customers move both data and metadata. 2 examples of this in the last couple of years. So one, we had a customer that came to us and said, hey, we need to be off Salesforce in 45 days. Can you do it? This is one of those, I wouldn't recommend going down this path, but we did it. And so, they challenged us, and it wasn't just a lift and shift. We actually implemented pretty complex custom DocuSign integration functionality with that one. And we were able to do it in 45 days. So think about that. I'm not suggesting every migration would be 45 days, but we've done it. And that was an enterprise customer. A second example is a little bit different scenario. So we have a customer who is about to go live. They're going to go live here in the next month. And giant implementation of Salesforce, 2,500 users, too customized, too expensive. When we first talked to this customer in January, they reached out to us about low code actually. They wanted to understand about Power Apps, Power Automate, and those sorts of things. They told us in the first conversation, Salesforce isn't going anywhere. The migration's not an option. It would simply be too difficult, right? As they learn more about Power and how Power relates to the platform, as we have more conversations about the realities, the things we've talked about today, frankly, over the course of a few months there, they went from basically, you're not going to pry Salesforce out of our cold hands, right, to, hey, when can we start? And we're in a 5-month journey right now to move 2,500 users, and we're going to complete that in 5 months. Again, this project 5 to 10 years ago would take double that time, frankly. So I'll say it again, heavily customized Salesforce instance migrated in 5 months, including change management, training, rollout, the whole nine. And honestly, now we laugh about that conversation in January. And the client's really excited. They're an advocate, which is amazing. All right. I'm almost done talking until Q&A anyway. So what are the truths of migration? So the reality is we don't want to paint this rosy picture that migrations are simple or easy. Hopefully you haven't heard that. As I said, change is hard. There is risk. There's risk in change, right? People who do both things, right, take risks. That's the reality. But there's also a risk of not changing or not evolving. Stagnation is risk as well. And the other thing I'd say is cost is larger than what a spreadsheet can tell you. There's impact on morale. There's impact on your customers. We get all of those things. But I'd encourage you, if you're not happy with your current environment, it's probably not going to get any better unless something fundamental changes. So think about the cost of staying the course. oftentimes it delays efficiencies, productivity gains, return on investment, customer satisfaction even. So we'd encourage you to think broader and be more strategic in your platform decision, not just where you've been, but think about where things are going, where the world is shifting to. Ariel now will share some thoughts on why now might be the right time.
I love it, Brendan. You teed me up, Brendan, with the where we're going, what the future is. So people have been migrating, right, making this transition between platforms for years, right? This isn't new. However, we're seeing an uptick in just curiosity around it, seeing more momentum around it. And why is this conversation happening today? So we think there's two major themes that we think are driving kind of this curiosity. And I wish I could have made it through today without saying AI, but I don't think it's possible to have a meeting where you don't acknowledge AI. But the reality is the rapid change we've seen in broad adoption of AI tools in the last 12 to 18 months is really putting every single tool that we're using, not just CRM, under a microscope. Are the tools that we're using, are the tools that our team, that we're investing in, or are the tools that we're not investing in, right? Might even be the bigger question is, what is going to support us on our individual companies' journeys navigating AI? And are advancements in AI making any of our existing tools obsolete, right? Are emerging functionality in one platform maybe creating redundancies in another? How is AI going to impact our resourcing, our team structures, and then as a result, what tools we need in our stack to support them, right? Each of us, every company is going to have a different answer to these questions, but these are questions we're all asking now and being forced to answer, and we are going to all have to answer them. So just kind of this emergence of who is leading in AI, where is AI showing up, who on our team needs to be using it, what are our use cases? Those are all part of this moment in time that we all find ourselves in. And then the second theme, which isn't unrelated, but we're seeing a growing trend in consolidation. So this is my personal opinion as someone who has vetted and purchased and implemented and removed many third-party single-point marketing and sales solutions in the last 10 years, is we're kind of spinning out of the last decade of this heyday of venture-backed B2B SaaS tools. I mean, like, you look at the market and you have your leaders, and then you have a dozen others, competitors, trying to fill that spot for your tech stack. And the reality is the emergence of low code tools, the emergence of broader platforms there's going to be consolidation. We don't need dozens or hundreds of single point solutions. And that customer example Brendan mentioned, that's where the conversation started. We had 400 single point solutions. Who is using these tools? Are we getting any value out of them? How are they connected? What are we paying for these? We're just in that moment where I think we're all really evaluating, we're seeing it with prospects that we're not looking for the answer of there's an app for that or there's a bolted on tool for that. We're looking at where can we use what we already have to solve that problem. And the reality is low code solves a lot of those. So the kind of like decreasing unutilized value, increasing costs, just that general gut check that we're all doing of our tech stacks is where can we find that consolidation and where are the platforms that are going to take us into the future, right? Because that's ultimately what we're doing is so much change. This evaluation is what are the tools that are going to get us to where we want to go. So with that, before we break for Q&A, I will follow up after this session with a link to the recording. For all of you, again, please feel free to share those with your colleagues. I'm also going to send you details, just a one-sheeter on something that we call a level of effort migration evaluation. If you liked this conversation and if you want to talk more, we want to talk with you. We want to talk more about your specific use case, right? Brendan and I, we're pulling on years of experience of talking to dozens and dozens of customers, but every business is unique, what challenges you're facing, what your flavor of fatigue might look like. If you just want to have a conversation around this, we want to keep talking to you. So very low pressure, but we want you to know that exists. Obviously, we love talking about this. So if you want to kind of just pick our brains, kind of just, have us answer some questions, we're here to help you do that. So with that, that's enough of us. if you have a question, a Q&A should be open. So please feel free, don't be shy. I'm going to bring Corey on here as well, so he's not awkwardly just appears. So here's Corey.
Hello. I appreciate you keeping me off camera as long as possible.
So I think I have to do it like this. Any questions for us? We do have one. We have a filler one, well, if in case anyone was shy. But this has actually come up in a recent prospecting deal that we had. So I think this is a really good question and kind of goes to that change at the end. So kind of going to open this up for Brendan, right? Our team already knows Salesforce, right? This goes back to that emotional connection, which I could talk about all day. But okay, so our team already knows Salesforce, right? How hard is it to cross-train the team? I think that's a good question to start with.
Yeah, great question. And my answer might be slightly different than Corey, so I'll let him piggyback on this because Corey runs kind of a team of developers, and my team is more functional in nature, configurers, if you will. So on the configuration side, I don't think it's terribly difficult to cross-train at all. I think, we've done this. We did this with our team at Sonoma when we spun up our Salesforce practice in 2011. The reality is we know what problems we're solving, right? So that's conversations don't change. The requirements gathering process doesn't change. What changes really is what knobs do I turn, where do I turn them, and how do I deal with, things that don't fit. So that's just learning the platform. We get people in, new folks we hire 30, 60 days, they're fairly handy with the platform, 30, 60 days training. And I think something similar from a functional perspective on the Salesforce to other platform side would be the expectation. So honestly, it was less of a challenge than we anticipated. And I would expect that answer to be the same. The development side might be different. So Corey, you want to take that one?
And we got a question, so I'll keep my answer brief. But the short version is it shouldn't be that much different, right? Like when we hire developers for our team, we look for people with .NET and JavaScript skills, and then we teach them the platform. So both Salesforce and Dynamics Power Apps have REST-based APIs. They have slightly different options for configuring or customizing user interface and building custom components there, but it's the same skill sets that you would work with kind of on either platform. I know Salesforce has the proprietary programming language, right? I've built triggers and things like that there before. We use .NET on the Dynamics side. So maybe you had somebody that came from the Java world and then learned Salesforce, that would be another piece for them to kind of go learn the Microsoft side of the house. But in the end, they're all technologies solving similar problems and doing them in similar ways.
All right, thanks guys for your answers there. We have a question from the group, so I'll just read it out loud in case anyone missed it. So the question is, in general, what does a Salesforce replacement platform look like in Microsoft? Real high level answer.
So if I understand the question correctly, kind of what would the stack look like in Microsoft? So there's a few components that are all part of the same thing, I guess, if you will, all part of the Power Platform. So, Salesforce, if we're talking about Salesforce automation or customer engagement, as Gartner calls it, on the customer service side, Microsoft has the same offering, dynamic sales, dynamic service, and you get some of that functionality similarly. If you have a sales license, you have basic service access and capabilities. Beyond that, Dynamics is just a Power App. So if you're familiar with Power Platform, you get the strength of Power Apps beyond just the sales app or the service app, right? So we have the ability to create Canvas apps, which are sort of blank canvas against the same CRM data on the Microsoft side. The configuration tools to configure the sales side is the Power App. It's all the same, right? So you have this broad ability to create apps that have some semblance of the CRM tool or blank canvas. The second piece you have is Power Automate, a very mature, sophisticated integration automation platform, right? Moving data around, sending notifications. There's something like 400 connectors that exist. So that's all part of the platform. And I don't, maybe I'm missing the intent of the question though, Bill. So I don't know, Corey, maybe you interpret it differently. Did I miss anything there?
I think that's it. I would probably say like communities have an equivalent in Power Pages.
Yep.
There's probably
Yeah,
some bit on the analytics side, right? Like
Chatter has an equivalent of Viva Engage. Tableau is an equivalent of Power BI, right? So, I don't find gaps there. I haven't seen, hey, but you're missing this one thing. I guess Financial Force maybe is a little, it's kind of like a mini ERP built into the platform, but I think it competes with Business Central on the dynamic side. So hopefully that answered your question, Bill. Other questions?
Be shy. We're not. Well, we're comfortable. We'll just sit here. You can just you can watch.
Everyone knows I love awkward silence. That's my favorite. All right, here we go. Oh, typically
Okay.
see and save. Yeah, good question.
Just gonna read it out loud for so obviously not straightforward answer because it depends on your contract and what you have purchased, but roughly what do you typically see in savings from a percentage basis moving to Microsoft from Salesforce? Thanks for the question, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, seen a wide range there, but typically I would say 30 to 50% is the savings in terms of license cost. The story I shared earlier, the 2,500 user move, they literally saved millions of dollars by making the switch. Almost $2 million, which is 50% of their license cost. Some of that was because they were oversold things they didn't need, right? Some of that was just pure license costs, and some of that was Microsoft coming to the table and helping as well. Does that make sense?
I think so. Thanks for the question. We'll leave it open for another minute in case anyone else has a question. But otherwise, I'm gonna give you one, Brendan. Corey, you might be able to kind of give some other context here. I have some perspective here, but another question, right, is what's the biggest objection you've seen from people considering making the switch? So I guess, Brendan, I'll put that to you first, is what do you think the biggest objection is you've seen from people considering making the switch?
I think the biggest, there's the typical stuff you'd see, like, I just don't want to take that project on, right? But I mean, honestly, the biggest objection I see, and actually one of my customers is on the phone here that should echo this suggestion as well, or that not the suggestion, but this challenge or issue or concern, right? And really it was, can Microsoft, can it really do everything we need it to do? Can this other platform, I shouldn't have said the Microsoft word there, but can this other platform really do everything we need it to do? That's the objection I hear. Prove to me it can do these couple things that are so important to our business. And then I'm open to the conversation, right? And I've never found, there's niche solutions that maybe Microsoft or other platforms don't have an integration for, or whatever the case may be, right? But rarely do we find a requirement or use case that can't be addressed similarly. Again, I said feature parity is there, and in some areas it surpassed other platforms. So, but that's the objection of somewhere in their head, folks have been, it's kind of been beaten into them for years that you can't do everything you need to in these other platforms.
It might be that when they did the platform selection that landed them on Salesforce, right? Like that was 4 or 5 years ago, and there was a much bigger gap then, right? So, so some of you kind of have to retrain your brain a little bit on some of the advancements that have been made.
That's the same perspective from a different lens, is someone who is so embedded with using Salesforce. And I've seen this in colleagues who, like, the emotional connection of why they had to use Salesforce. Like it was, on the business side, on the sales side, is because, and they've been using it for so long, they actually don't have any perspective, and that's not their fault. They don't have any perspective of what other platforms can do. They only have that old story of what 8-10 years ago was. And that then translates to this like identity around, we have to use this. This means something if our team uses this. This means something for us as like individual sellers or contributors of this, about if we use this tool. And kind of that objection is following more of the emotion of individuals on the team and affinity really with a tool instead of maybe what's best for the business. And that's a hard conversation to have, but bringing kind of those the individual users along and showing them that the parity is there. But Corey, you said it really well, is that it's like you got to rewire the brain and show a different perspective. Okay, we filled the question time, so nothing else came in. So thank you all so much for coming. Brendan and Corey, I could talk about this with you all day. Appreciate those of you who stayed with us till the end. If you have follow-up questions, we would love to talk with you. We can get into more detailed specifics around your particular use case and where you are sitting on your journey. But thanks so much for spending an hour this afternoon with us, and we'll talk to you soon.